YouTube vinyl community of Montreal fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we're here today to talk about of Montreal's newest EP, Rune Husk, released on Polyvinyl Records. Now, this EP comes off of recordings that I think date back to Aureate Gloom and definitely from their last album, Innocence Reaches. And whereas these songs probably wouldn't have fit anywhere on those albums, they fit together here well as a cohesive unit, I think. EPs are kind of hard to judge because with only a few songs, you're not really getting a vibe or a story or an idea per se. But this album EP is different and kind of interesting. Just to see other parts of Kevin's brain that he was playing around with during the writing of his other albums. It's cool to see how you can write a bunch of songs and then pick the ones you want and make an album out of it. And that's basically how a lot of albums happen. Or you pick the best songs you think would make for an enjoyable listen and then go with that. Kevin Barnes is the leader of Montreal. They have been a band for about 20 years now. And in that time, there's been member changes and style changes, everywhere from making music that sounded like vaudeville to weird spoken word to the Beatles, Bowie, Prince, avant-garde, classical, folk, EDM. I mean, you name it, they've done it. And they do it in their own way. And the last album that came out in 2016, Innocence Reaches, was really kind of hit or miss. It's kind of split down the middle of like, does it want to be an EDM album? Does it want to be a rock album? What's it want to be? And from what I've seen in interviews and read in interviews with Kevin, that was kind of the intention, is that it's a mixed bag. You kind of get to pick what you want to like, and there's some stuff to choose from. So while that album is definitely not my favorite by them, this I feel is interesting. It's on its own. It's its own little world. There's songs on here that date back from the last couple albums, and one I don't really know where it came from, but let's just go into it. The first song is called Internecine Larks. That's a bit of a mouthful. And it opens with this kind of like, spooky, moonlit, eerie piano, leaving lots of empty space. And because of that, that space in between the notes, you get this like uncomfortable vibe, which is really interesting to listen to, especially because the chords used are kind of dissonant and minor chord, and pretty cool. But that spooky stuff, I think, allows for contemplation. It allows time to think. So like you hear a bit of the music and then a space, and you're kind of like, okay, what's going on? And that happens a few times, and it allows you to like get absorbed into the song before it fades into kind of like this hypnotic little thing in the background. And it's his lyrical style on this album, as has been for the last few albums, is kind of like this laid-back Lou Reed approach, whereas albums 10 years ago, his vocal range was all over the place. The last few albums, he's been kind of chill. He's been doing this, like I said, laid-back thing. And it works sometimes, and sometimes I don't know if it works the best because he's got an amazing voice. But it's cool because there's a line where he says, murder like a prop. But the way he sings it sounds very Syd Barrett. There's a couple moments on this EP that sound slightly influenced by psychedelic 60s stuff, which I hate to bring that up because for the last few years, I feel like writers and critics find it really easy to pigeonhole them and be like, oh yeah, here's another Bowie ripoff. And it's like, I don't know if they're doing that on every single song, but there might be a slight influence just because those people were a big part of his writing growing up and music that he listened to. So I mean, not every single of Montreal album is going to sound like David Bowie. There are influences there over the course of their career, of course, but this album, I don't know if it does that. Kishibashi plays strings on this album, and they're pretty good friends. And Kishibashi used to be in the band, and I will eventually review one of his albums. But the song itself builds up to this like really passionate but bleak climax, and then fades away into nothing. So it's a really cool intro to this EP. The second song, Stag to the Stable, it started off its life as a song called Pariah Conscience for the Polyvinyl 4-track series. That was like a vinyl-only 45 set that bands would get together. Well, their bands would record to a 4-track recorder, and then they were pressed as 45s. So the original version of that sounds a little different. This version is a little more produced and has a little more going on, has more bass. But this song for sure is very much like in that Lou Reed, um, old school Stooges heavy rock kind of thing. You know, the big power chords. And his vocals on this song, I think, really work with that like too cool for school kind of style of his like laid back singing. But it works. There's a little bit of a solo in there, and musically it's a lot of fun to listen to. It's kind of a hooky kind of song, you know, some pop elements going on in this one. It's a song about a relationship having ended and kind of reflecting on that relationship and how this guy just wants to be himself and not hurt anybody in the process, and maybe sometimes that's hard to do in a relationship. There's a fantastic line on this song that goes, "Disappearing is eerie when you don't ever care." Oh no, I'm sorry. Disappearing is eerie when you don't even care to maintain a physical form. I mean, that's like a crazy line. I think that's really cool. So yeah, "Stag to the Stable" is probably the best song on the album, purely for its pop sensibilities, because it's catchy and because as humans we've been conditioned to know what we like and don't like when it comes to music. The second song, or the first song on side 2, "Widow Sucking," was also another one of those songs that came from the Polyvinyl 4-track series. So both this song and "Stag to the Stable" at least date back to 2014 or 2015 in their earlier forms. But this version of "Window Sucking" is really cool because it's a lot different from the other one and has very much like a 2000 Light Years from Home Rolling Stones vibe. When it kicks in, it's got a really hypnotic bass that travels throughout the whole thing, and some cool laid-back synthy stuff going on. It's kind of a good head bobber. It ducks out in the middle to do some spacey stuff and kind of like, you know, dips out into a different terrain for a while, and then comes back. And there's 2 lines that Kevin sings with the most passion I've heard him sing on a new Of Montreal release in years. Just for 2 lines, he's like really there in the zone. And then it ends with some more of that synthy, spacey stuff, but this is definitely the precursor to the next song, "Island Life." So this actually does make sense to have these songs in the order that they're in. I think it plays really well as a mix. You know, you get this weird intro with the first song, and then "Stag to the Stable" is kind of poppy. "Widow Sucking" is kind of a head bopper, but has a little bit of a pop vibe to it, which leads to the last song, "Island Life." And this song for me is a little more difficult to get into. It's got this heavy march-like bass drum aesthetic that sounds like a drum circle from hell, and buried on top of it, held over the fire pit, is Kevin reading this poem. And I think as a poem it probably works better, or just as a set of lyrics, but on top of the music it's a little hard to do just because it's not really syncopated and it's not really in any sort of like rhythm per se to match the music, and that might be the point of it, and I can see that, but because of that it's kind of a hard listen. It's interesting for sure, it's definitely interesting as hell, just because the music is so chaotic and weird and manic. That gives it a vibe of maybe I'll stick through this just to see where it goes. But it's definitely not an easy listen, I think. But the rewarding aspect in that is if you weren't really feeling what he was doing with Innocence Reaches, maybe you'd like what he's doing on this album because it's just kind of weird experimental stuff. Yeah, very weird. But yeah, the first song, Internecine Larks, that did appear on his Instagram at one point, I think in 2016, very early on in 2016. So that was bubbling around during the Innocence Reaches era. Stag to the Stable and Widow Sucking were around at least near Aureate Gloom, like right after that, somewhere in 2015. And Island Life, I'm not really sure where this song dates back from. Probably Innocence Reaches also, because it sounds a lot like Chat Pilot. Not a lot like it, but like they're pretty comparable. So I can see why this wouldn't have been on that album, because the two would have sounded a lot alike. Overall, it's a really interesting EP. Also, for the first time in a long time, his brother David did not do the album cover. This guy named Mr. Babies on Instagram did the album cover, which I think it's a cool picture. It's just different to see not David Barnes' artwork on here. The record itself is on clear vinyl, so that's pretty cool. Overall, I think I'd probably give this thing. Oh man, it's hard to rate their albums because when I got into this band around 2004, 2005, they sounded different back then. And at that point, they had sounded different than they had even 6 years earlier. So there's so many eras of this band to discover and get into. And it's hard to judge their albums because you're judging on an ever-changing palette. So it's kind of hard to be like, well, compared to their last album, this sounds like crap because the next album after this is going to be different. You're going to be like, oh, well, this might have been as good as the other album. There's a lot to choose from. But on its own, as a whole, just as a listen, without comparing it to anything else they've ever done before, it is a unique experience. I'd probably give it like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7. It's not the best thing they've ever done, but I think I like it a lot more than Innocence Reaches as a whole. Innocence Reaches had some good songs on it. Here I am comparing albums again, but only because these songs come from that era. Yeah, I'd probably give it a 6 or 7. It's definitely worth picking up and checking out if you're looking at, here's something new and kind of experimental and go down the rabbit hole of weirdness for a little bit. But, yeah, here's the back cover. That's it. This has been Of Montreal, Rune Husk, their new EP. Check it out. It is out now. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Of Montreal, Rune Husk. Thanks, guys.